Welcome to Grounding Elevation, the podcast for open minds and open hearts to dig a little deeper and ascend a little higher on a quest to tap into our limitless potential, mind, body, and soul. I'm Carrie Ann Jean, mom, wife, daughter, sister, artist, writer, learner, rebel, entrepreneur, psychology enthusiast. I have a deep passion for self-improvement that has sent me down many roads of growth and learning and unlearning. I believe that God, universe, whatever you call the highest power, the source from where we all have come from, it speaks, and it all but yelled at me to do this podcast. This is my leap of faith in spite of my insecurities and self-doubt and humanness. So here we go. Join us weekly as we embark together on a grounding elevation. Hello, friends. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to jump into this episode today. Last week, the mind, body, spirit pillars is really what we're leaning into in this podcast. How do we elevate ourselves holistically in all ways? And last week, we really dug into kind of the mind and the spiritual side, talking about fear and divine guidance. This episode, I want to jump into the body a little bit by talking about food. There's a lot of content about food out there. And it can be really, really confusing. And so today I want to talk about the system, the thought process that I use when I'm evaluating food. Because depending on who you're talking to, what's considered healthy and what's considered, Satan's spawn, absolutely terrible for you, it really depends on who you're talking to and what gauge they're using, right? So you've got people that think that fat is the worst thing in the world. You should avoid fats, all kinds of fats at all costs. Fat is bad. Fat makes you fat. That's something that was kind of coined in, decades and decades ago. And that's kind of how the processed food, low fat industry was born. They put a hit out on fat, and anything that's low fat is healthy. Okay. I don't subscribe to that thought process. I think most people would agree that just because you eat low fat, no fat, does not mean that you are healthy. It does not mean that your body is functioning optimally. And then there's, the camp that says carbs are the worst, carbs are bad, carbs should be avoided at all costs. I don't subscribe to that either. A doctor that I follow, actually the owner of the practice where I see my doctor and my daughter sees her doctor, she's a big advocate for especially women in fertile years, like menstruating women. Avoiding all carbs can be really detrimental to your hormone balance. And as women, our hormone balance is so essential. Now, I'm not demonizing like keto. If that works for you, that's great. However, that's not the gauge that I am going to be using when I talk about foods that I think are beneficial and foods that are not beneficial to our overall health. Another thing I want to touch on before we kind of jump in here is when I'm talking about food, I feel like most people, and most conversations about food it's directly related to, the way your body looks. Okay. So it's diet culture, oh, you're not healthy unless you are, ripped or super thin, or, there's a lot of intermingling between the conversation about food and the conversation about body image. I'm not talking about body image today. I'm sure that we will do an episode about the big beef that I have with the diet culture and, women comparing themselves to each other and being compared to other women and being held to an absolutely unrealistic and unhealthy standard of what is considered quote unquote beauty. I'm sure we will get into that in another episode. Today, I want to talk about food in the sense of inflammatory foods. So, certain foods elicit more of an inflammatory response inside your body than others. Okay, so there are certain foods that are considered high inflammatory foods, meaning they elicit a high inflammation response in your body. And that's what I'm going to talk about today are the foods that elicit a high inflammatory response within your body and why we might want to avoid those foods, even just for short term or just to be cognizant of what's happening inside our bodies. I think it gave me a better understanding of how my body works with food because, like I said, the conversation about food for most people and for so long for me was always about how you look and wanting to change how your body looks. And gosh, like as more time goes by, I guess the older I get, I know it's so corny, not old, but like the more years I'm on this planet, the less I care about what other people think about how my body looks. I'm more concerned about how I feel inside my body, right? Like me, my essence, my soul, myself, right? I want to take such good care of this body because this is where I live for my whole life here, right? This lifetime, this is the body I've got. And I want to take care of it and I want to feel good in it and I want to function well in it. And I want to have energy to keep up with my crazy, amazing, beautiful, wild 2-year-old girl. I want to be able to, get into that therapeutic state when I'm running. And, I want to be able to lift heavy things and do yard work and, throw my toddler above my head. And I'm more concerned about the function of my body than the appearance. And that's not to say that I don't struggle with body image at all and, I'm free from it and I don't care. No, that's the goal. I would love to care less, even less than I do. But as time goes by, I have changed the way I approach eating, food, all of it, rather than being, if I eat this, am I going to be skinny? Or if I eat this, is this going to properly fuel the functions of my body? And that is a shift. And it's not an easy shift to make. Don't get me wrong. I am a human being. I do not have it all figured out. I get into the shower sometimes and I'm like, oh man, or, oh, hey, my abs a good day, whatever. I'm definitely I'm working to get away from that more and more each day, more and more each year. But when it comes to eating and it comes to food, if we can shift our focus to fueling the functions of our body rather than eating to look a certain way, I really feel like that can be a positive step in the right direction as far as a better relationship with food. I, as a teenager, very much, I look back on like the things I did in high school and I'm like, oh, okay, so I had an eating disorder. That's pretty clear. I was, I would starve myself and I have somewhat of an obsessive mind sometimes, so I can really take things really far. Like, how long can I go without eating? Well, okay, if I eat this many calories and I burn that exact many calories off at the gym, then the calories burned throughout the rest of the day is just all extra. And I'm going to be so thin and I'm going to be so this, right? Like, I've so been in that place. Like, oh, I'm hungry. Just drink water. Like, my friends would ask me like, oh, what should I do to lose a few pounds? Like in high school. And I was like, oh, just chew gum and drink water. Terrible, terrible advice. That's one reason that teenagers should not be giving advice to other teenagers. Let me tell you. Horrible. And to anybody listening that I recommended that to, I think I've already personally apologized to you for that, but I want to apologize publicly for leading you astray in that situation. But all that's to say, I've definitely had a negative relationship with food, growing up. And now it's something that I'm really consciously working on, as much as possible. So all that's to say, today we're going to talk about foods that elicit a higher inflammatory response in the body. Not calories, not fats, we're not talking about whole categories of foods. We're talking about what foods elicit a high inflammation response. Now, before we get any further, I'm not a doctor. This is not medical advice. If you are in a state of disease and, consult your healthcare provider, trusted healthcare provider, you know the spiel, right? I'm not a doctor. However, I always recommend if you are in a state of like chronic health issues to seek out an integrative medicine doctor or some kind of holistic practitioner that can kind of walk with you individually, because everyone is so different and there's just no replacement for the individualized holistic care that is out there. And if you need help finding someone in your area, I'd be happy to kind of send you in the right direction as far as resources. Okay, with that being said, let's talk about inflammation. Now, inflammation is not inherently bad, right? I'm of the belief system that our bodies want to heal. They know how to heal. We just have to stop getting in their way, right? We need to support our bodies to do the healing that it knows how to do. So when it comes to inflammation, I want you to picture this as your body has a finite amount of resources within it, right? It's got, let's say, 10 firefighters, okay? We'll use firefighting as an example. Your body has 10 firefighters working inside, rushing to the scene of issues, okay? So we're talking injury, we're talking foreign invaders, little bugs, little sticky bugs, whatever. You've got 10 firefighters inside your body rushing to the scene where repair is needed or where the fire needs to be put out, if you will. Now, imagine your body with a whole neighborhood inside of it. Stay with me. These 10 firefighters are in charge of this entire neighborhood that is your body. If one house is on fire, all 10 firefighters run to that house and they put out that fire. Okay, it's going to be a lot easier for those 10 firefighters to effectively put out the fire in that one house than if there were 10 houses in the neighborhood on fire, or all the houses, the entire neighborhood's on fire, and your firefighters are just running around trying to put out all these fires, and they're a lot less effective than if they were just fighting one fire. Okay, that's how I want you to imagine your body and inflammation. When your body has a ton of issues that need to be addressed and they're constantly encountering inflammation, your body can't be as effective because it's going so many different places. It's sending resources to so many different places, right? So what we'd like to do, ideally, is we want to get our inflammational load down. And I'm talking chronic inflammation, right? Chronic inflammation happens all the time when we're exposed to things that are eliciting an inflammatory response. Are you with me? Tell me you're with me. I hope you are. Hang on for dear life, because here we go. When your body is so inflamed that all the resources are going all which direction, trying to put out all these different fires, they're not going to effectively be able to handle, like really put out any fire. When you're eating foods, every time you eat, if you're eating foods that are high inflammatory response, it's taking away resources from the other things going on in your body, like the injury you got at the gym, like the sicky bug that you encountered that your body's trying to fight off for you. All those things, okay? Our immune system is so smart, and it's doing the very best it possibly can. So what we want to do is help it and support it. So if we can cut back or cut out inflammatory foods, we're basically giving our body a break from constantly inflaming these different, causing inflammation in our body that doesn't need to be there. When we're eating, we should be eating for health, not eating, just for the sake of eating whatever. And I know it gets so confusing because there's so many conflicting things out there. Oh, don't eat this, don't eat that. At a certain point, and I think this is intentional, this is the conspiracy theorist in me. I think it's intentional to make us so apathetic that we're like, you know what, everything is bad. I'm just going to eat whatever I want. I think that really serves, the companies that are trying to make a lot of money off of us choosing convenience over quality. So that is why we were talking about inflammatory foods today. I have personally eaten this way to address hormone issues. I've eaten this way to address, like, if I feel myself getting sick, I get really strict, like, okay, let's lower the inflammation, let's lower the inflammatory load, and cut back on these, inflammatory foods. Another theory that I have, and this is just a theory, it's totally unproven. It's just me doing my thinking, which is essentially what this podcast is. It's just me. It's just me and the way my brain works, right? If a certain type of food triggers a high inflammatory response in the body, if inflammation occurs when there's a foreign invader or cell damage, essentially, there's some kind of damage happening in the body. If inflammation happens when there's damage, doesn't that equate the food is causing damage? These are foods that are causing damage on a cellular level, whether that's because of the chemical content, it's, saying that this is a foreign invader and we don't know what to do with it, so store it somewhere in your fat cells. Or if it's causing damage to your cells, I don't know. But to me, that's the most compelling reason to stay away from certain foods or to at least limit them. Another thing I want to say before we get into what inflammatory foods actually are, I don't want to share anything in order to scare you. I don't want you to feel scared. I don't want you to feel fear inside your body. Oh no, if I eat this, something bad's going to happen to me. I don't want that, because fear is such a powerful emotion and it's a very powerful energy inside your body, and it's very debilitating. It very much takes you out of your truest self when you're in a state of fear. And the reason that corporations, agencies, they like to use fear is because it's a very powerful, energetic property. They like to use fear because it works to move you in whatever direction someone wants to move you. I don't want to move you in any direction, okay? I really don't have any skin in this game. This is simply information. Take what speaks to you, discard what does not. I don't want to use fear to motivate you. What I want is to help inform, because these are things that I didn't know and I wished I'd known sooner. I really did. When I learned all this stuff about inflammatory foods, I was like, that makes so much sense. And I could have resolved so many things if I had just known this before. So I want to help educate you, not to scare you against these foods. Oh, don't touch these foods. Don't look at these foods. Don't think about these foods. You can't never have these foods again. No, I want you to know what could be causing a high inflammation response inside your body so that you can go, okay, and you can use informed consent, right? I'm going to eat this even though I know it's an inflammatory food, but I'm going to eat it anyway. But I have full informed consent in doing so. Or you can use it to your benefit if you are in a state where you aren't feeling well, if you are not waking up with good energy in the morning, if you are in a season of being stretched really thin and you need to be operating as optimally as possible within your body, these are good perimeters to use to kind of adjust. I will tell you 60 to 90 days, cutting inflammatory foods completely out of your diet, out of what you eat, is definitely a game changer if you need any kind of like reset or gut reset, or you've been really sick and you need to give your body a chance to recover, or you're trying to get pregnant, or you are pregnant, or you are postpartum, or you are, wanting to do some kind of big athletic event where you need your body functioning at its optimal peak performance. This is really helpful guidelines to kind of make sure that the foods that you're putting into your body are actually helping you and not hurting you. So none of this is intended to be a scare tactic, fear monger. And I really encourage you to, if you feel that fear rise up in your body, whatever you can do to try to diffuse that, and to release that is in your best interest. Nothing is going to wreak havoc on your entire being like fear. So fear is a great thing to just do your absolute darndest. Of course, it's easier said than done, but, when you feel that feeling rise up in your body, regardless of what it's about, take some deep breaths, ground, rationalize, do whatever you need to do to try to just release as much fear as possible. 'Cause holding fear inside your body, making decisions from a place of fear, I just don't recommend any of it. So that's my spiel on that. Let's jump in to high inflammatory foods. Now, before we get into like actual foods, I want to say everyone is different. And because of that, there are going to be other foods that are going to be really high inflammatory for you individually and might not be for someone else. Okay. These are the foods that are high inflammatory for most people pretty much across the board. They're the most common foods that will elicit an inflammatory response within the body. Included in this list, individual for you, would be anything that you have a sensitivity to. Okay, so if you had your food sensitivities and food allergies tested, which I think is a really great thing to do, you'll be able to know more specifically, oh, these foods are going to elicit more of an inflammatory response within me, because I have a sensitivity to those specific foods. So just keep that in mind. Anything that you have a sensitivity to, an allergy to, they're going to elicit an inflammatory response within your body. Okay, here's the list of the biggest offenders. I'm going to list them out and then we're going to go through and talk about them. First up, sugar. Number 2, dairy. Number 3, gluten. Number 4, soy. Number 5, highly processed and hydrogenated or partially hydrogenated oils. Processed meats. And lastly, highly processed foods. So that is the list of foods that are typically going to elicit a high inflammatory response within your body, within most people's bodies. These are the biggest offenders. So I first learned about inflammatory foods when I read a book called Beyond the Pill by Dr. Jolene Brighton. An excellent read. It really, honestly, that book literally taught me like more about how a woman's body works and how my body is supposed to work, as far as fertility and hormones. And I honestly learned so much more about myself from that book than anything I ever learned in health class or anything else, in my life. And I was already like in my late 20s when I read it. I was like, wow, this would have been really beneficial information to have like forever. But she talks about some of these foods because of their inflammatory response in relation to how they affect your hormones and the really delicate dance that female hormones kind of have to do, or get to do rather. But that was the first time I learned about certain foods eliciting an inflammatory response. So let's kind of jump into each one. First up, let's talk about sugar. So when we talk about sugar, this is not sugar that like the sugar content that you'd find in like fruit, like a strawberry, right? Like we're talking about processed sugar, table sugar, cane sugar, sugar like corn syrup, processed sugars. Processed sugars is what's going to cause that inflammatory response. Now, follow a doctor, I believe his name is Dr. Amos, and he was saying that when sugar from fruit is taken out of its whole form, the body processes it differently because it's missing the fiber content. Maybe that's what it is. I can't tell you. I'm not a scientist guy. I haven't dug into why it happens in the body, but I can tell you from my personal experience, when I eat processed sugar, I feel it. I feel it in all my cells. Is it worth it sometimes? Yes. However, being mindful has really been helpful because I can make a choice. Hey, I feel like I'm coming down with something. I'm going to be really strict about avoiding all processed sugar. Or, hey, I really want to make a batch of cookies to snack on and to just have in the house. I'm going to use a more pure, nature-based, less processed form of sugar, like a maple syrup or a coconut sugar, something along those lines. So it helps me to make informed decisions. Okay, I'm, making cookies for Christmas. I'm going to use regular sugar and it's fine. Like it's all about being informed, understanding what's happening in the body and making decisions that are better. What I did learn when I kind of jumped into researching sugar was what it does is it creates oxidative stress and inflammation in the body, which we don't want. That's why it causes inflammation. Number 2, it feeds bad bacteria in the gut, leading to poor gut health. We will likely be doing probably many episodes on gut health because it's just so important. And I have really walked a journey of figuring out my gut health. And it's been probably the most beneficial thing I could possibly do for my overall health was working on my gut. And sugar does a really good job of feeding bad bacteria. So just a very brief synopsis. Your gut is made up of billions, trillions, gajillions of bacterias. Some are beneficial and they eat the bad bacterias. If the bad bacterias grow out of whack, it can lead to a lot of different issues down the line, and it can cause a cascade of health issues within your body. So if we're feeding bad bacteria with sugar, we probably don't want to eat heaps and heaps and heaps of sugar, because then our bad bacteria is going to go out of control, and then it's going to cause a cascade of other issues down the line inside our bodies. So that's another reason that we want to probably be mindful of sugar. Probably my biggest beef with sugar is that I found some studies that showed 75 grams of sugar weakens the immune system and makes it not only weakens it, it just about shuts it down. So let's say you have encountered a little sicky bug, right? A cold, a flu, something like that. You've encountered a sicky bug. Your body is trying to fight it, okay? If you eat 75 grams of sugar, and we're talking like a soda and a piece of cake, and you're well over 75 grams of sugar, your immune system shuts down and it's like, oh, okay. Well, I'm not going to fight this sicky bug. I'm just going to let it take you over until you're like really feeling it. So if you're trying to fight a sickness, this is something I try to practice. Avoiding sugar, that's probably the most crucial time to avoid sugar, is if you're fighting any kind of like little sticky bug or illness. Another little imagery that I like to think of when it comes to sugar is, you'll notice if you are starting to come down with something, or you've encountered something, you'll start to crave sugar. Okay. And this was something that I learned, and I was like, this makes so much sense. And it's such a cool imagery. And it's something that I've really held on to that helps me to stay cognizant and to stay thoughtful about my food choices when I feel like I'm, encountering some kind of sickness, or I'm fighting a sickness. Your body will crave it. In your head, it just feels like, oh, I'm craving sugar. I want some ice cream because I don't feel good. Okay. Or I'm not feeling good. But if you can imagine this, just imagine a little sicky bug, like a physical bug, even though it's microscopic, but imagine a little bug inside your body. It sends signals to your brain to feed it sugar, because it feeds the bad sicky bug. So the bad sicky bug is like, I'm hungry. I'm trying to survive. I'm trying to make you sick. I can't make you sick if I'm not fed. Please feed me some sugar. And it will send messages to your brain to feed it sugar. And so to you, you're like, oh, I'm just craving sugar. Well, it's not you craving sugar. It's the sicky bug inside your body craving sugar. And that imagery, I literally think of it every single time I start to feel sick, and I'm like, oh, I don't feel good. I want cake. I don't feel good. I want some cookies. I want ice cream, right? I think of that and I go, no, I don't want that. The sicky bug wants that to try to take me down, and it's not going to happen. So that's just kind of a fun thing you can think of. Some other things to keep in mind about sugar. Sugar hides in most processed foods, especially the foods that are marketed as low fat. So in order to make something taste good, you have to put something that tastes good in it. You feel me? So the low fat industry, the industry of processed low fat foods, oh, it's low fat, it's healthy for you. They just shove a bunch of sugar into those processed foods so that they taste good, so that you want to eat them. Because if they are lacking in fat, they have to have something to make them taste good. So being really mindful of processed foods, and keeping in mind that not all sugar elicits the same glucose response in the blood. So some sugars are going to spike your blood sugar more than others. And sugar in the form, like I said before, in the form of fruit is going to be, it's attached to its fiber elements. It's attached to all the other enzymes in that whole food. It's going to be broken down just completely differently in your body. So here's some advice, I guess, not medical advice. Absolutely not. We never do that here. um, some ideas, I guess, on what you can do instead of eating, heaps of sugar and not depriving yourself of, what you want. Number one is to eat whole fruit. Fruit can be really sweet. I know if you're like a sugar fiend, like I once was, it adjusts your taste buds. If you're constantly eating things with processed sugar in them, your taste buds like almost like get dull, if you will. They kind of, I mean, I hate to say it, but they dull. Your taste buds don't pick up the sensitivity of the sweetness of sugar anymore. So you probably taste fruit and you're like, fruit's not even sweet. But the longer you go without having like lots of processed sugar, if you can cut it out, even just for a couple weeks to a month. I mean, I always recommend if you're going to cut something out to see a real benefit of it, 60 to 90 days is a great amount of time to kind of reset your system. It will literally reset your taste buds so that when you go to eat something that you used to think wasn't that sweet, you'll be like, wow, this is really sweet. Which is kind of cool that our cells kind of adapt that way. So eating whole fruit is a great option. If you're a big baking person like I am, I love to bake. I love to make baked goods. It's something that is just good for my soul. Use different forms of more natural sources of sugar, like honey, like maple syrup, coconut sugar. Those are my top 3 options. Agave, things like that. Another option, moderation, of course. And truthfully, just being mindful of what you're eating, just being mindful, of where sugar is hiding. Sugar is super addictive. So the more you have, the more you want. And if you are like somebody who just eats a ton of sugar, you probably inside your mind are thinking like not eating sugar is literally impossible. That's the addictive nature of sugar. And if you go 30, 60, 90 days without any processed sugar, you're going to find that you don't want it as much. You're not thinking about it as much. You're not craving it as much because of the addictive nature of sugar. Now, something that I do want to mention is just because you don't want to eat real sugar, I don't want you to go down the path of fake sugars. Okay, we're talking chemical sugar, quote unquote, sugar alternatives. I have yet to find a single sugar alternative that is innocent enough to be better for you than sugar itself. Okay. Chemical sweeteners are made in a lab and they're designed to be as, if not more addictive than sugar. The more you eat, the more you want. It's still messes with your taste buds. It makes things that are naturally sweet not seem as sweet, not seem as good. And I have not found a single one that doesn't cause other issues. Additionally, any kind of chemical creations, they have a tendency, your body has a tendency to recognize those as foreign invaders because they are. And that's probably going to elicit a very similar inflammatory response within your body. So the chemical sweeteners, for me, I would say no to all of them. I would go for a coconut sugar or a maple syrup, or I would even go for regular old cane sugar. Before I would recommend eating those quote unquote no calorie, quote unquote sweeteners. They're not better. They're calorically less. However, just because they don't have the calories of sugar doesn't mean that they aren't just as damaging, if not more, truthfully. Another tip as far as blood sugar is concerned, because we don't want to overly spike our blood sugar. Something that I learned when I was pregnant, actually, because I kind of had to do all this testing and, we'll get into that at a later episode. But if you pair fats, like healthy fats with something that's on like the higher sugar side, your body is less likely to spike as much blood sugar. So pairing healthy fats with sugar is often a pretty good, helps your body to balance it a little bit better. So that's a little fun fact for you. Next up, we have dairy. Okay. So when we talk about dairy, we need to clarify. Dairy is a hormonal fluid. Okay. It's a hormonal fluid of an animal. Anything that the animals ingest is present in its breast milk. Okay. And that's something that a breastfeeding mother knows, right? Like anything that you eat, if you are breastfeeding your child, they're going to get elements of whatever you're eating. And no, breast milk doesn't come from your stomach. It comes from your blood. But what you ingest makes its way into the elements of what you ingest makes its way into your blood. So if you eat something spicy, there is the possibility that your breast milk will taste different based on what you're eating. That is a pretty good indicator that what you eat is present in your breast milk, right? Dairy is the breast milk of animals. Often, especially in factory settings, okay, if you're not getting your dairy from a local cow on, the farm that's down the street from you, which most people don't, factory farmed animals, if that's how you're getting your dairy, they're going to be loaded up with a lot of stuff, okay? The animal themselves is going to be loaded up with all kinds of antibiotics and vaccinations and hormones to make them produce more and grow more. And, there's a lot that these animals are subjected to. So that's something to keep in mind. Anything that the animal is ingesting or being given is going to be present in your dairy, okay? In your whatever dairy you're eating. After the dairy is extracted, it goes through a ton of processing. And there are a lot of additives and preservatives and all kinds of things that are added to your dairy in order to process it into different things to make milk that has is shelf stable, cheeses, all those things. There's a lot of stuff that's added after the point of when the cow is milked, if you will. When it comes to cheese, pus is pretty common. So that's usually just like sifted out and then they just keep making the cheese, right? That's gross, to say the least. So that's kind of what I want you to keep in mind when you're thinking about dairy. Now, if you are getting your dairy from the cow down the street and you go to the farm and you pick it up, right? And you know the farmer and you know their practices and you know what the animals are being given and what their living conditions are like and all that kind of stuff. That's a very different ballgame. When I'm talking about dairy, I'm talking about your typical dairy that you're going to buy in the grocery store. Okay, so what do? Dairy elicits a inflammatory response in most people. Most people's systems are not set up. We do not have the right, whatever it is, enzymes, whatever. Our guts are not in the right situation to properly digest the hormonal fluid of other animals. Okay. So it's going to elicit an inflammatory response in the body. So what can we do? First option, moderation, right? We can cut back. Another option, in addition to kind of cutting back, maybe not having dairy constantly flowing through us, choose organic. Try your darndest to find dairy that isn't treated and these animals that are just injected with so many things. It's like you are being exposed to all those things too. So that's something that I think a lot of people miss. It's like, oh, well, if I'm buying dairy's way better because if you look at the ingredients, it's just the milk. It's like, okay, where did that come from though? Where did that just milk? Where did it come from? Came from an animal that has been treated with all these different things, and they don't have to put that on the ingredient list. They don't have to put, this milk was made in a factory with 1,000 other cows crammed into a tiny space where disease is running rampant and antibiotics and vaccinations and steroids and hormones are pumped into these animals and, so that they'll produce more milk and they'll make more and they'll, be bigger and whatever the case. You're exposed to all that too, which is what I believe is why it's causing an inflammatory marker. Your body's not necessarily inflaming because of the milk. It's because of all the things that happen to the animal, all the things that the animal was given that comes out in the milk. And that's why where you get your dairy and your meat is so, so important. Because the truth is there's just not, there's no way to guarantee unless you go to a local farm and you meet the farmer and you see the cow and, ideally in that setting, I think dairy probably elicit less of an inflammatory response. And that's just me, theorizing. So that's something that you can do is get to know your local family farmers. They're absolutely out there. Another option are plant-based options. Now, there are a lot of plant-based options. Not all of them are better because a lot of them contain a lot of additives as well. So you really have to be careful about the labels, reading labels well. There's also recipes to make your own like cheese alternatives with nuts. No additives, no preservatives when you make it yourself, which is typically what I go for, is to make my own cheeses myself. However, there are options out there to decrease the amount of dairy that you're ingesting. Next up, gluten. Okay, so something to know about gluten. Gluten is really poorly grown in the US. That's not like, I'm not trying to throw shade at anybody, but the growing and the processing of gluten in the US, I think that's where the issues are. Because other countries with stricter standards, they don't seem to have the same problem as us in the West, okay? I can't tell you how many times I've heard stories of friends going to Europe and eating nothing but pasta and bread and cheeses and all the things and having no gut issues and not feeling bloated and not feeling bogged down and not feeling drained and, not having the same gut issues and gut inflammation responses. As you do when you eat it here. And that's just that, to me, that is a clear indicator that it is not about the gluten necessarily. It's about the way the gluten reacts to the processing. So the way that wheat is grown in this country is glyphosate city. Okay. It is sprayed so heavily with so many chemicals. And it's brutal and it's rough. And I really don't think that it's like the wheat itself is the problem. I think that the response happens because of the way that it's grown and the way that it's treated. So I don't know even that I don't even know if I can say that it's really like wheat is the problem or gluten itself, that enzyme protein, that's the problem. It's that reacts with what's sprayed on it. I think that's what the issue is. However, it's a common thread in this country, unfortunately. So what can we do? to cut down on the inflammatory response. Organic is always better. I see a big difference in the way my body processes organic grains in compared to non-organic, like standard oversprayed grains. Less processed whole grains are going to be better as well because of the fiber. Practicing moderation is also obviously an option. And then there are gluten-free options too. There's a lot of really great gluten-free options. Always choose organic. Gluten-free grains can have their own issues as well. So you just want to be really cognizant about reading labels. Sometimes in order to make things gluten-free, they have to add different things. And that's when your ingredient list goes up a little bit too much for my liking. But just be cognizant, be thoughtful. Know that gluten is inflammatory. And if you're having a hard time with something going on health-wise, something chronic, cutting out gluten is not a bad idea. Next up, soy. Okay. So a lot like gluten, I don't think it's the soy itself that's the problem. I think that it's the way that the soy is grown and handled. It is heavily sprayed with chemicals. And it's the non-organic soy compounds that are the versions that you're going to find in heavily processed foods, which is another reason that I think it causes a high inflammatory response, because it's the non-organic version. It's an isolate from that whole element. And in excess, besides the way that it's created or grown or processed, besides that, it is, if you eat enough of it, it can interrupt hormone regulation. Now you have to eat it in excess, and I'm talking mass amounts of soy. However, people always bring that up. Oh, if you eat soy, your hormones are going to be messed up. The amount of soy that you have to eat to mess up your hormones, significant. Truly, it's significant. So I'm less concerned personally about eating too much soy to mess with my hormones. My main concern is always eating organic, and moderation. Practice moderation. If you're practicing moderation, you're not going to be eating something in so much excess that it causes issues or imbalances in your body. You definitely want to be mindful, because soy is something that hides in a lot of things, so it can add up on you, especially if you're eating a lot of processed foods, which I don't recommend doing that anyway. But if you're going to eat soy, always choose organic. Know where soy hides so it doesn't add up too much on you. And as always, just practice moderation. Next up, highly processed oils. Okay, so hydrogenated, partially hydrogenated oils, highly processed oils. Okay, these are all terms to basically say processed. When you have oils that are processed at super high temperatures, they're allowing free radicals to form, and they're going to cause damage to your cells, and then you're going to cause inflammation in your body over time. So what are the oils that typically you want to try to avoid? Okay, we're talking shortening, margarine. Okay, those are oils. Those are the hydrogenation process. Vegetable oils like soybean, canola, sunflower, corn, like those common vegetable oils, those are going to be your super highly processed oils with the free radicals and the ick. Okay, and the way they're processed and the chemicals they use in order to extract and to manipulate and do all these things, I promise you, you don't want any of it. It's not doing good things in your body. Okay, so instead, cold press is ideal if you're, for oils. But olive oil, unrefined coconut oil, avocado oil, make them organic, problem solved. Olive, coconut and avocado are my top favorite oils. And you're just not going to get that same, you're not going to find the same issues in those oils in their purest form, as you would in like a vegetable oil. Next step, processed meats. Okay. Whether or not meat in and of itself is good for you and your health or not is a very much longer convo that we'll probably get into at some point in its own episode. But for the sake of brevity, I'll just say that everything that happens to that animal, like with the dairy, is ingested by you. Okay, so like we talked about with the dairy coming out in its hormonal fluid in its breast milk, right? Anything it was injected with, all the antibiotics, steroids, hormones, all the things that are given to that animal, the diseases that it encounters in not great living conditions, the food, the low quality food that they're fed, all of that is part of the cells of that animal, right? All of that is part of the cells of that animal. And then you eat the cells of that animal and it's meat. So quality is of the utmost importance when we're talking about meat. Now, when we're talking about processed meats, again, the processing of the meats is like step 2, right? Step 1 is like the raising of the animal, which is full of issues, if you ask me. Step 2 is how the meat is processed after the fact, okay? Something to keep in mind. Some butchers, especially when you're buying meats in a grocery store or just your standard old place where you buy all your stuff, they are known to put food dye in the meat to make it look healthier than it is. They've been known to cut off rotten parts of the meat or, like when the animal is being processed, if there's cancerous tumor growths, they'll just cut those off and then, create different cuts of the meats. The practices are really ugly. So that sounds disgusting, Carrie Ann. What can we do? Okay, right. Let's talk about a remedy. Moderation, of course. You cannot eat any meat at all. I don't. That's just me though. But if you are the kind of person who's like, I have to eat meat, I know it's good for me, whatever, more power to you, that's fine. Get to know your local cattle farmers and their practices and buy meat directly from them. The only way for you to really know what's going into your food is to get into the nitty-gritty details and to do the less convenient work of finding a reliable place to get your meat. And I can promise you that there are places out there, especially, I'd be willing to say anywhere in the country, you can find great cattle farmers who take great pride in their work. And not only are you going to be giving yourself the gift of like quality meat, knowing that you're not ingesting a bunch of nasty stuff that you don't want to be ingesting, but the meat's going to taste way better. I can guarantee you. And it's going to make all the difference in your health. I truly believe that. So if you are like, I can never give up meat, no chance, no way. Okay. I think it's a lot simpler to do, than we've been led to believe. I haven't eaten meat in a long time. But if that's not something that sits with you, that does not ring your inner truth bell, get to know your local cattle farmers. At the very, very least, you're going to want grass-fed, organic, humanely raised. It all makes a difference. Be very cautious because labels can be deceiving. That's why I say, getting it direct from your local cattle farmer is going to be the best bet. That's going to be the absolute best thing you can do. But there's steps, there's gauges. You can just go organic, grass-fed, all those things. It all really just, it adds up and it makes a difference. Last, but very much not least, any highly processed foods. Okay. This is another topic that we'll probably jump into with the whole episode someday. But what it comes down to is the toxicity of the additives and the preservatives that are allowed in our food. Okay. So Europe, the EU bans thousands of chemicals from being added to food and cosmetics. Guess how many the US bans? How many chemicals does the US say, no, that's not fit for human consumption? That can't be in our food. That can't be added to our cosmetics that are going on our skin and getting integrated into our bodies. The US bans 11. 1. That's it. The EU bans thousands, which means there are thousands of chemicals allowed in the food in the US that is considered toxic and banned in other countries. Okay, that fact alone should blow your mind. And what that fact did for me is gave me a realization that, oh, well, the FDA wouldn't allow it on the shelves if it wasn't safe or if it wasn't okay, is a lie, to put it simply. What's being regulated and what's being allowed in our food is insanity. And we have to be the gatekeepers of our health. We have to be the gatekeepers of what's allowed in our home. We cannot rely on anybody, any agencies, anybody that's supposedly supposed to be making sure that we aren't sold toxic sludge. The responsibility is on us. We have to be educated. We have to be the gatekeepers ourselves. And that's just the reality of the situation. The exact same companies that are selling toxin-riddled food to American grocery stores sell their safer versions compliant with the EU's stricter standards in other countries, which tells you that these food companies as well, they can make a better product. They can make a product that isn't riddled with all this toxic sludge. But they would rather make a cheaper product with a higher ROI because they can in the US. And that's just like a sad reality, right? It's just a sad reality, but it is a reality. And the chemicals that are added to our food, I'm not saying like, oh, these companies want to make us sick or they want us to be, they're trying to kill us all. Like, no. The reality is that the chemicals that they add, is all about their profit, right? So they're adding chemicals to the food to be, one, more addictive, so you'll buy more, keep coming back, right? A good customer that keeps coming back. And then they add these chemicals to preserve and have a longer shelf life. So what are the two ways to make the most bang for your buck? Make sure that people keep coming back and buying more from you. Number 2, make sure that your food can sit on a shelf and still be sold for a very long period of time, right? If you put like a piece of fruit out in the grocery store and it goes bad, that's going to be a lot slower ROI than if you could put a bag of chips on an aisle for 4 years. I mean, it's a lot bigger window of being able to make a profit, right? Something that has a longer shelf life is going to have a bigger window to make a better profit. So when it comes to processed foods, we have to be so careful. Now, I would love to say, oh, don't buy any processed foods ever. Yeah, okay. That would be nice. Yeah, sure. That would be awesome. That's a great thing to aspire to. However, if you are going to buy processed foods that you would find in the, unrefrigerated aisles of things you store in your pantry, things like that, you want to read labels very, very carefully. Okay? Read the labels, know what's in them. Number 2, practice moderation. if we know that these processed foods have a bunch of added chemicals to them, and we do our best to try to avoid what we can, right? We don't want to drive ourselves crazy, but avoid what we can, control the controllables, practice moderation. If you know something's not the best for you, you're not going to eat it for every single meal, every single day. You're just going to be a little bit more mindful about weaving your nutrition plan a little differently. Maybe not all processed foods. If you don't know what an ingredient is in a label, look it up. Because chances are, if you don't know what it is or you can't pronounce it, you probably don't want to be eating it. And that's just kind of like a rule of thumb. But there's also some really great apps out there that will kind of help break things down a little bit. I've heard of two, the EWG and the Yuka app. So EWG is a great option. It classifies ingredients by what is, so it's got like a scale. It's got 3 scales, either green, yellow, or red if it's like really reactive in that area, but it classifies them as an allergy, reproductive, and carcinogenic. So it'll classify the products and give it like a rating in each section. Like, is it likely to cause an allergy reaction? Is it, do these ingredients, are they connected to reproductive harm? That's fertility, things like that. Are these ingredients connected to carcinogenic? Have they been tested for carcinogenic effect? So it kind of breaks it down that way, which I really like. The database is pretty large. It doesn't have every product ever, but the database is decently large. So that's a great option. You can scan food, you can scan your body products, cosmetics, all that stuff, and it'll kind of give you a rating. What I have noticed with the EWG is I like body products that use essential oils rather than using fragrance, because fragrance is an endocrine disruptor. And we can get into all the things I don't like about fragrance in another episode, of course, but I like essential oils better than the chemical synthetic fragrances. That's a choice that I typically will make. And the EWG app does typically classify most of the essential oils as a risk for allergy. And that's just because they're so potent. But it gives you enough information to where you can be like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Like, I'm still willing to buy this product because I'm not concerned about the allergic side of the essential oils that were used in this product, right? Like, that doesn't concern me personally. However, chemicals in the product that are rating, in the red of carcinogens, that would make me rethink potentially buying a product. So that's the EWG app. Another app is called Yuka. And it does a pretty good job of just being really simple and telling you, like, classifying the ingredients, and bringing up the additives in whatever it is you're scanning. So, like, it'll tell you what additives are in there, and it uses the European standard for what is and is not allowed as far as what they will rate as like risky additives. The only thing I don't love, there's a couple things I don't love about the app. A couple things I don't love about the Yuka app. It's a great tool to help kind of break down labels, especially if you're not used to reading labels, and you don't really know like what you're looking for. It's really, really helpful. However, the overall rating, like it'll rate a product out of 100. And even if a product doesn't have any additives, but say it's like really high in fat, it'll give it like a really low rating, because it'll say, oh, this product is too high in fat, or too high in sugar, or too high in whatever. This is too high in calories. Okay. I don't love that, because that's not what I base my decisions off of. However, if you scan it, it'll show you, you can click on the portion that says additives, and it'll show you the additives and kind of where they rank as far as like riskiness or toxicity. The other thing I don't love about the app is that it's given a good rating to things that have synthetic fragrance in them. And to me, that's like a huge red flag. Like anything that has synthetic fragrance, I'm like, I try so hard not to buy. And it doesn't really alert you to that. It's like, oh, there's fragrance in it and it's not great, but it's fine. That's kind of the standard it uses. So it doesn't help me spot the fragrance as well as I'd like it to. However, it is a really helpful tool, especially when you're just learning kind of about additives and reading labels and things like that. My general rule of thumb when it comes to processed foods, when I'm reading labels, is if I can't go pick it up off the shelves and it's essential in making the product myself, then you probably want to avoid it, right? Like, oh, just a dash of BHA, titanium dioxide, and potassium bromate, and it's perfect. It's a perfect meal. Like, no, you wouldn't add those things. So you probably don't want to eat them because they're probably being used to just preserve and add to addictiveness and all those things. And it's just not benefiting your body. At the very most innocent level, it's not benefiting you. At the most least innocent level, it's hurting you. My other recommendation is just making your own food. There's absolutely no replacement for knowing exactly what goes into your food because you made it yourself. It's a really great feeling. I love to cook, so maybe I have a different thought process on that. People that don't love to cook, that might not sound as intriguing, but knowing what goes into your food is such a comforting feeling, not to mention, the energetic side of it when you're cooking and you're, creating food for your family that you love or your friends. It carries a different energy. It will carry a different flavor. Call me crazy, but I think love is always the most important ingredient when you're cooking. And I can promise you're not getting a whole lot of love if you're buying the processed foods from the shelves in the grocery store. Okay, so here are the takeaways. We went over so much today. I hope you found it beneficial. I hope you found some nuggets of helpful tips to just elevate your physical experience, your experience in your body. This is our one body for this lifetime. This is it. This is our home. We want to take care of it and feed it nourishment. We want to nourish it. We want to love on it. I think that's just so important. So I hope this was beneficial to you. Here are some key takeaways. Okay. We want to know what's in our food. We can't practice moderation if we don't know what we're moderating. We want to create a connection between our food and the earth. I think that's so important. Consider supplementing some of your list with local options if you can. Getting to know your food is going to benefit you in so many ways. And over time and intentional consciousness, you'll start to see connections between how certain foods make you feel. And then you can kind of gauge that accordingly. We want to eat for fuel. I think eating for fuel is more important than anything else. Eating for an aesthetic. The truth is that your body will naturally find its healthiest rhythm, its healthiest weight, its healthiest form, right? It's when it's functioning at its best, and it's going to function at its best when we're feeding it fuel rather than feeding it convenient junk, essentially. Something to keep in mind, you can't expect that if you eat, you cut these foods out for a day, for 2 days, for 3 days, right? Holistic healing takes time. Coming out of a state of constant inflammation takes time. So if you want to try this form of eating out where you cut out all of these, all these different options, these different foods to see if you can lower your inflammatory load. My recommendation is to commit for a absolute minimum of 30 days. Ideally, you want to go 60 to 90 days. That's where you're going to see the biggest benefit. And that's where you're going to find the real benefits to the lowering inflammatory load. So if you're trying to see drastic improvements really quickly, stricter is better, but it shouldn't be strict or nothing. You don't want to be like, well, I'm not going to completely cut out all of the high inflammatory foods, so I'm just not going to do anything at all. Moderation, doing something is always better than doing nothing. So anyway, I hope you found this episode helpful. I am so excited for us to support each other in making conscious choices and fueling our bodies to thrive. So reach out to us, subscribe, rate, and review this podcast wherever you're listening from. Make sure to find us on socials so we can connect and support each other. Let me know how I can help you. I would love to support you however I can. And the community here at Grounding Elevation, I think we can all really support each other. So make sure to follow us on socials at Grounding Elevation. And we'll see you next time. I love you. Mwah. Ciao.